That increase was not the middle of it. You do like for sure. That's how I get in. Once but it is the thoughts of yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben. I use he, him pronouns. I'll be the chair of your debate today. So welcome to round 4 of the New Zealand Schools Debating Championships. Well, congratulations to both teams so far. The motion for the moot for this round is this House would introduce performance-based pay for teachers. So I'll just get you to do your introductions for you in your teams. So just your name, your pronouns, and whether you're okay with being live streamed. So we'll start with that.
I'm Bella Chen. I'm first app and I'm okay with the advice.
Hi, my name is Sarasa Gu. I'm speaking second in reply, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm also happy with being with it.
Joshua third, he, him, consent to
I'm James, first and leaders, he, him, and I consent to be.
I'm Michael. I'll be doing second. My pronouns are he, him, and I consent to be.
Hi, I'm Bren, third speaker, he, him, and all good be recorded.
Wonderful. I'll just remind teams that speaking times are 7 to 8 minutes with POIs between the first and the 7th minute. So I'll clap once at 1 minute, once at 7 minutes, and twice at 8 minutes, and then 3 times at 8 minutes 15. Replied speeches are 4 minutes long. I will clap once at 3 minutes, twice at 4 minutes. With that, I welcome up the first affirmative speaker to begin with today's debate. Yeah, just at the desk with the monitors. Yeah.
Like,
Behind you. Yeah.
This one?
Oh, there you go, Brendan.
Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. When students have better teachers, they learn better. When students learn better, teachers are happier. That is a cycle that we exclusively accrue on our side of the house. On side opposition, we reward good teachers. On side opposition, they punish them. I am so proud to affirm. I'm going to be doing 3 things in my speech today. First, on framing and our model. Second of all, on how student learning outcomes improve. And third of all, on why teachers are treated fairer and more equitably. Firstly, on framing and model then. The first thing to know is how would performance-based pay be implemented. A, we would divide students into quartiles, and we would give students weighing and decide pay based off the amount of kids who stay in high quartiles or like move up or move down as such. We think that we are also going to choose to weigh lower quartiles more so that like any improvement shown is actually like given greater encouragement. But B, we think that we will judge our pay based off of performance paying off the base pay that they already received. So that means that if you do better, you're just going to be paid higher, and so on. You're going to be paid through things like bonuses. C, we think it's going to be implemented by governments in public schools, and that private schools are likely allowed, like in the status quo, to set their own curriculum and to do what they want with their own teachers. D, we think that lower decile schools are just likely to get more like amount in a bonus than decile 10 schools simply because of the difference between between of the students. But secondly, I want to note that this thing is going to be scaled country-wise. So this means that if a year of education results in the overall level of education in the country leveling up, then it means that the country has spent more on education, same vice versa. Before I move on to my first point, I'll take a POI.
When you build from this baseline and spend this money, why is it not better spent on a general pay rise for all teachers?
Because teachers are not encouraged to improve student learning outcomes in the same way, I'm going to move on to my first point on why we uniquely improve student learning outcomes. The framing of this point is that in the status quo with a fixed wage, many teachers are simply not motivated to teach. This is because good teachers are demotivated when their efforts never receive recognition or bonus. When they watch teachers who do not try at all be given the same rewards as them. Over time, we think that even the initial motivation that they had will fade because they have to sacrifice their time. They have to sacrifice their effort, and when this work outside of class is never acknowledged, we think that watching the students do better is just not sufficiently rewarding for them to keep putting in this effort. So this is because they're still stressing over their bills. Maybe they see a lot of kids and they have to let them go at the end of each year, and they know that they're letting them go on to worse teachers. So at the end of the day, they just lose this motivation. So this means that in the status quo, you are actively encouraging teachers to put in the least amount of effort possible. We think that the impacts of this are reflected in the ever-decreasing literacy rate in places like the US, when teachers are just unmotivated to help the teachers improve. The first thing I want to prove then is why we actively encourage better teachers on site acquisition. Firstly, I want to note that already good teachers are rewarded. When you put in the effort and you achieve better outcomes, you can be guaranteed that you will be recognized accordingly. You will never feel this burnout or this discouragement from always feeling that you are never being seen. But second of all, we feel like teachers who aren't as motivated are now encouraged to put in more effort because we think that this monetary thing offers an incentive. Because when you have more money, obviously you are able to achieve more things that you want. You are able to buy that new house, that new car, achieve that nice new holiday to France with your wife. So this means that we think that this extra money is likely going to be the tipping point to these teachers being willing to do things that provide more detailed feedback on exams or re-explain things in more understandable ways instead of following the same template, which means on the end we encourage better learning. But thirdly, we think that on a basic level, we actually motivate all teachers because even if you do not care about your teachers, at the very least, you probably don't want to watch your pay decrease as your students' grades decrease as well. That is, A, there's an inherent disincentive behind losing what you already possess. When your wages get lower, that is something you're just very incentivized to avoid. But second of all, you would just probably rather be a decent teacher. You probably care about your students to some extent. You don't want to have your wages drop and also like watch your students get worse. Second thing I want to prove then is why better teachers actually means better students. Firstly, on a basic level, better teachers make contents that are easier to learn. Because even if you believe that students are equally motivated on both sides of the house, they simply learn better when content is more digestible, when it actually feeds directly into their minds and they're able to understand it. But secondly, learning becomes more engaging. Teachers have ways to make subjects way more fun so that kids can actually enjoy them. For example, a good chemistry teacher can just provide really fun chemistry like explanations that actually makes kids enjoy the subject and makes them willing to put in more effort. But thirdly, I just want to preempt why teachers actually have this ability to make children learn in the first place. Firstly, teachers have power over kids. I think that you should believe that at the point where teachers are able to do things like give detentions or just tell kids to do things, that the majority of kids tend to not outright disobey their teachers. So this means that even if they do, I think that's probably going to be downright symmetrical. But second of all, we think that teachers usually come from similar regions to where these kids usually come from. So they might share similar life experiences. But they know how they would have learned best as a kid, and they will know how to give these teachers the same things that they may have needed. But third of all, note that our model puts this debate at a comparative. We are comparing the same students at the front of year and at the end of year. Your literal only job as a teacher is to make sure that the students have more motivation at the end of the year compared to when you first met them. So maybe this child doesn't mysteriously become a straight A student. But if they possessed enough determinations to scrap past last year in the first place, I think that the measure of your teaching ability should be that at least you managed to get them to scrap the same past because their motivation has not decreased. You should believe at the end of this point then that there's likely going to be this basic correlation in teaching quality and the change in the students' grades. What are the impacts of this point? Firstly, students learn better. Note that this is incredibly important because when students learn worse, when they have worse exam outcomes, that affects their university qualifications. That means they go to worse universities. It means they get poorer careers. It means that you impact an entire generation of poorly educated kids who form a less capable workforce in the future. But secondly, we should believe that the most vulnerable, most lowest income kids are impacted the worst because they are the children who need help the most in the status quo. Teachers are never willing to put in the effort. They are harmed disproportionately and they are just set up worse for the futures. On our side, when teachers are motivated to aim for improvement, we actively help the kids who need it the most. They get special attention, they get catering for disabilities. You just ensure that they get more fair, more equitable opportunities. On to my second point then on the equity towards teachers point and why teachers overall are just treated fairer. Top of this point, I want to frame that given the same conditions, we ensure that better teachers are just rewarded beyond worse teachers. That is, when based on like motivation and grade improvement, we think that we, at a basic level, we manage to get this increased level of equity for the vast majority of teachers. First, on white schools that just treat teachers better. We think that when good teachers become a valuable commodity, because obviously your school is being like paid more, given more money, when you see this improvement in grades, right? You just see more people moving into the teaching industry. But it also means that the teaching industry becomes more fair because you are judged based on like the level of improvement you get in your students, and that is a very, very solid measure that you can judge them by. On the comparative, they are never able to do that because you cannot have this like clear measuring metric to like how your income increased. But secondly, I just want to address the idea of teachers in really bad schools. Note that in our model, these teachers are just given the most motive to improve because they already are given more money for even marginal improvement. So this just means that they are more motivated to teach these unteachable students. But I want to weigh off any harms that AF can play. Because even if you believe that there's absolutely no improvement on their side, you should still weigh the students above the teachers because the teachers can leave, the students cannot. At the end of the day, we benefit the students, we benefit the teachers. I'm so proud to affirm.
For this speech, I invite the first speaker of the negating team to the debate.
Believe a world in which you inherently incentivize teachers to prioritize a certain group of students over another group of students. There's the inevitability that students will fall through the cracks. We believe teachers to teach for all students. That is what we stand for. That is what we are proud to stand for on our side of the house. 3 things to do for you in my speech today. 1, a point about setup, then on to my 2 substantive points. 1, how we believe that the quality of a teacher cannot be quantified and therefore will be unmotivating, will be demotivating for teachers. And then secondly, how we believe it's going to be far worse for students in the long term, and my rebuttal will be integrated throughout my speech. So first, onto some setup. What do we believe our counter model is that we propose in this debate? Our counter model is essentially the money that was redirected, or the money that we suddenly now have to be able to reallocate towards these towards this performance pay now goes towards teaching colleges. We now put this far more money to teaching teachers how to actually teach properly. We also believe that this looks like greater oversight and standardization of these teaching colleges and these courses, so that therefore we believe that the teachers across multiple decile schools are able to have the same quality of teaching and learning. We also see that this is things like having refresher courses, that every 5 years when a teacher can come back, teachers come back to the college, they take a test, and also you work through different things and you're able to develop and learn a whole lot more under our side of the house. You get to, say, for example, get up to date with curriculum changes that have happened. We believe these happen quite often, but it's also things like developing your teachers over time. What are the problems that you're facing in class? How can we rectify these things? what do we believe the core problem is in this debate? We believe essentially teachers do want to teach. We explain their motivation. I'll explain that in a bit later as well. We believe currently the problem is they just simply do not have the ability. They do not have the capacity to teach in the way that they want to. We believe that the characterization that we hear from the affirming team that teachers can just suddenly turn it on and teach better is not true. It's incorrect. We actually don't believe that. Why is this? Firstly, one of the problems that teachers are facing is things like curriculum changes. Second, B is things like they don't have the skills now to deal with increased class sizes. C is things like students changing with social media. The times that they were taught, things have changed rapidly with AI now. They don't know how to deal with these things. These are the problems we believe teachers face. We actually don't believe these are things. And we know this because why do teachers go into education? We believe firstly, they want to go into education to educate, to learn, to teach people. That is why they go into it. It's a real preference in their choice. They are educated. They go to university. They could go to any other career path. They could go to be a scientist. They could be a doctor. They could do all of these things. They choose exclusively to go to teaching. Why is this? Because they want to see the catharsis of bringing students up. We believe this also motivates over time. When you see another student later, another student develop over time, you're far more likely to get catharsis from that student to be motivated. We believe this motivation consists over time. And we also believe there are other things they care about, primarily also having the means and capacity to do these things. I'll tell that here right now.
Maybe you enter into the teaching industry especially passionate, but we've told you on our side the cycle that happens when you see poorer teachers being rewarded for doing nothing, so you are incentivized to do worse. How would you respond to that?
I'll respond to that in the sense that we're going to say that you actually see exactly that on their side of the house, and that teachers, I'll just explain this now. When teachers can't be, the quality of a teacher cannot be quantified, and I see worse teachers not being able to worse teachers being rewarded. So in this argument, I'll prove to you that the best teachers, the qualities that we want in our teachers, things like pastoral care, things that happen outside of the direct grades that you get, the things that set up students the most, cannot never be quantified, leading to a loss of motivation for our best students. We believe why this is important. Essentially, so why can quality never be quantified? One, because we believe the only way in which you can have a uniform method of assessing the quality of a teacher or the development of a student is through grading. It is through math, it is through a test, and standardized test that is uniform around the world. What this inherently misses is that it misses the pastoral value or these other benefits that you get that a teacher can provide. It misses the things like pulling aside a student to teach them and have a word with them about their anger management flaws. It means teaching them these other things about how can you communicate properly. It's like pulling aside a student and giving them maybe a special exception about as to why something's going on at home. It's things like conflict resolution or teamwork. These are the other skills that the pastoral care or caring about a student far more is never going to be rewarded or incentivized. Why is it not? Because these are longer term things and benefits that you get way down the line. So if you're wondering in your head, why don't you just see these performances great? You don't, because again, these are long term things that happen and other teachers benefit from it. So we believe it's entirely exclusive that you are unable to quantify these things that we want in our students and these better developments for these students. Secondly, we believe there's so many political changes. I mean, a teacher cannot be we believe education is based on politics. It's a very popular thing that governments like to change. Why? Because your voters' kids' futures as well, and other things like this. How does this manifest? It manifests firstly in a lot of curriculum change. We see that all the time. We see NCA reforms. We believe, note here, our model fixes this. You have these people every 5 years. You come back and you address these changes in curriculum. You're able to stay up to date. We also it's things like non-academics, cutting a bunch of jobs elsewhere and stuff like that, which affect families and affect kids. Thirdly, on class disruption, we believe there are just so many externalities that affect how you learn in class or your class schedule or your plan for a class or your plan for students. What does this look like? It looks like an entire school getting a case of the flu outbreak. It's school sickness. It's things so, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic happening, which entirely throws off every single plan you had for your teaching and being unable to adapt to those things under their side of the house. It's things like having a period 5 Friday class where no student is ever locked in or no student is ever wanting to learn. They just want to go into a weekend. These things really, really disrupt the things that go on in your, disrupt the way you teach and your ability to teach your students. One of the outcomes of this is that firstly, it leads to things like your teachers are less motivated. Why is this? Because again, your quality teachers, we believe the teachers, the long-term skills that really do set you up for life, those things like communication, teamwork, anger management, that you inherently have to teach through these pastoral or these things that cannot be quantified by a teacher. These things are lost, and therefore the quality teachers that we have that are doing these things that we want become inherently unmotivated. Instead, the teachers that just teach for tests and that teach just to cram you with a bunch of content and could not care less about you as a student, get a whole lot more money, you're inherently unmotivated then, because you believe that you are told implicitly through the amount that you're paid, then you're a worse teacher and you're not teaching your students well. This is where we believe, in response to that POI, that like just inherently, like we believe that the worst teachers are getting paid less, and the best teachers are getting paid less and are less motivated. Or secondly, even if they are like, or they just try and game the system, they stop doing this pastoral learning and do like start teaching for tests, we lose that under their side of the house. On the comparative, we believe across board, you still have the motivations to teach your students better. And we also believe like we're able to like deal with those curriculum changes as well. We wear this so highly because we believe like these teachers are ones we should be like prioritizing, and we get better outcomes for students at the end of this. Essentially, we believe both teams have kind of fallen upon this as well. Very quickly, why we believe like uniquely this some other material about why this is uniquely worse for students, and prove to essentially that like a lot of these other incentives that act on these teachers are uniquely causing them to teach students far worse. Why is this? I think the context for this is that although teachers are, we've established this like underlying motivation that teachers want to teach their kids, teachers also want to have a job in order to be able to teach their kids. They want to be able to be employable, and they also like do want to be able to put food on the table. So what does this mean? We believe that like teachers therefore like inherently will just prioritize like small certain groups of kids and not kids and like not the entire class, for example. Well, it looks like teachers like teachers prioritizing small groups of kids because they can get paid more. So, for example, teaching a certain group or like 5 really disadvantaged kids, and then immediately when you see that those kids are not making any progress, they have no hope to make progress with these kids, or they just immediately give up when it's not easy on these kids. You just give up and move to other kids where you believe you can make more money or make more paychecks. We believe that in a world in which like there's an opportunity cost for not teaching these other kids, we want our teachers to prioritize these other kids. We feel like there's an incentive here that like you prioritize those numbers over these things because you want to be able to be employed. If you like have a bad reputation because you're not getting paid a lot, you are unable to be employed by another school. You want to stop those things. So that's where those incentives override your overall ability to want to teach people. That's why I'm proud to negate it.
I think the speaker might like the second speaker of the information in the new year.
Teachers want to help students, but when you give every single teacher the same amount of baseline pay, that is when you take away any incentive for them to actually act on their desires to help students. That is when they never take the extra measures to actually help those who are most disadvantaged in society. That is why negating cannot win today's debate. A few things in my speech then. First, I'll be responding to their counter model and also just kind of the points they brought up. And then secondly, on my split, which would be on how we are able to improve inequalities. First, what they told us about putting teachers through teaching colleges. I'd like to first flag here that this isn't very exclusive. We are also able to put teachers through the same training, but also second of all, even if you believe it happens with a less degree of funding, the change is not going to be significant because teachers are already being adapted to things like AI, like technology, through things like uni lectures, through things like their teaching community groups. They are already being adapted to changes. I don't think the change to teaching colleges is going to be that significant. Second thing on this idea of the same pay for teachers, I think this is when you actually take away any incentive for teachers to properly act to help the students who are most disadvantaged. Because they talk about students who are going to fall through the cracks, I think this happens the most on negating because there is no longer incentives for teachers to care most about students that are vulnerable. There's no longer incentive for teachers to continue ensuring that students are improving because they know that the pay is going to land in their pockets anyways. They are able to disregard the students who aren't focusing. They are able to disregard the students who are falling behind. They get the worst harms on their side of the house that they describe when you give the same pay to all teachers and you tell them it is going to go to their pocket at the end of the day anyways. Thirdly, then on the idea of quantifying performance and pastoral care. Look, Bella explained to you in her speech already how we're going to have a model of improvement. You're able to collect the students' grades at the start of the semester, analyze how they have changed in the middle or at the end of the semester or at the end of the year. And this is very easy with increased uses of technology, with increased and easier uses of data analysis. You can do this analysis for how students have improved. I think we've already explained this clearly, how we're going to quantify their performance. We then bring us this idea about how pastoral care is incredibly important for these students' well-being. Look, your relationship with your student is going to be good on either side of the house because you intrinsically care about them. But we tell you that this pastoral care happens to an increased extent on our side of the house because you rely on the students improving and performing well academically for them to actually give you that extra paycheck. This means that when a student is suffering at home because they have issues with their parents or they have issues with their relationship with their friends and their grades start to fall, that is when teachers step in and they want to do something. Because if you give teachers the same pay no matter what, they are not going to take time out of their already busy day to come out and talk to the student. If they know that their extra pay that they are able to get, that extra stake dinner they're able to have, relies on them actually making sure that student gets good grades, that is when you're able to actually have best pastoral care. Finally, then, on this idea of political requirements they bring to us. Our model is based on improvement. You don't get infinite increases of money anyways. I don't think their point on political requirement has been explained sufficiently because it's unclear why the government is going to want to disrupt the education of their students. I think they still care about the citizens. They still care about progressing their workforce. I think it is clear at the end of it that their pace doesn't stand. Before I move on to my split on inequalities, I'll take a point.
Surely a world in which a year 7 teacher teaches a kid how to communicate properly, a benefit only seen in, say, for example, year 13, surely that teacher is demotivated to do that in the future because they don't see the benefits of it to their paycheck.
I don't think these benefits of communication are only seen 10 years down the line, right? Because even in primary school, you have things like oral assessments, you have things like developing your social skills. Even if it is not tangible, things like that, if a student is able to have better communication, it means they understand people around them better, they are more mature, they are able to access better learning outcomes. I think for all of these reasons, teachers are still going to be incentivized to actually help their students. They still want their students to improve. Even if it is not in terms of communication, they're going to prepare students better for the future in terms of assessments, in terms of how they are doing in life. Next, on my split on inequalities. Look, in either world, we think there are going to be altruistic teachers that love their job and they want to help students in disadvantaged areas to further their learning outcomes. These teachers likely remain the same on either side but the unique benefit we are able to get is that those teachers that are compensated for extra work that they do and for their efforts to help disadvantaged communities. Note that this is a huge benefit we are able to exclusively get on our side of the house because it means you're able to help these teachers gain recognition. Note here Bella's point on equity, right? Secondly, the teachers that wouldn't be as altruistic when you just give the same pay to everyone probably don't go to these disadvantaged schools. So it means that our model is the tipping point for increased capacity for teachers to earn better wages, receive bonuses, meaning that they are incentivized to go to these schools. The context here is that schools in disadvantaged areas don't get bad results because of the kids, but because of the education they are given. The learning environment contributes to how they perceive education, and note that a bad education system leads to harms that compound over time. If students are set up poorly in primary school, it looks like having poor habits. It looks like not knowing how to study, not having curiosity or a love for knowledge being fostered. And these are all examples of things that are crucial for kids to develop and enrich their future learning outcomes and their ability to tap into advancing their future studies. The harms of being subject to a poor education system from a young age are more than just students not being able to understand the alphabet at year 3. It looks like they are disadvantaged from the get-go, and this translates into very tangible harms because they are no longer equipped to deal with things like secondary qualification. It looks like never being taught how to study properly, so you don't know how to manage your time. It looks like being 3 years behind in your math work because your teacher never taught you timetables properly. This here going to impact the importance of education, especially for those in disadvantaged areas. First of all, it is a means for them to escape a cycle of poverty because if they are able to access proper education, like a secondary qualification, like even a tertiary education, it means they are better equipped to get a job in this economy. It means they're able to get a stable life, stable family, stable set of income. This takes them out of the cycle of poverty. Second of all, education means that you were able to better advocate for your circumstances, meaning that your political capital is also able to increase. Because when you better understand the policies that are being passed and how they impact your life, you're better able to make decisions that actually help you and help improve your own livelihood. This should explain to you why education is especially crucial for individuals to escape from these lower socioeconomic backgrounds that harm them so much. But how are we able to exclusively help these students? Note here that I flagged this performance is going to be based note that here that the incentive the performance-based pay is going to be the tipping point for teachers to actually improve education outcomes in these schools, because when you give them the same pay anyways, there's going to be less incentives for teachers to actually go to these schools, because they might be in areas that are further away, because they might have worse systems set up, worse facilities, stuff like this. Look, first of all, lots of teachers just need a lot of money, so if they are already in one of these schools where students perform poorly, instead of being complacent with the amount of pay that they get, it is now an opportunity for them to earn a lot more money and improve their economic situation. Obviously, this money that they get in increased amounts is contingent on student outcomes actually improving, so teachers can't just go to these schools and not help these students. Second of all, there are also teachers who aren't currently within these schools that decide to move now because of this incentive that you get increased pay. I think lots of teachers need money, and they see helping lower decile students, lower decile schools, as one of the best ways to access these bonuses. Because first of all, note our model about how even a marginal improvement in these lower decile schools due to the proportional scaling means that you still get a bonus. But second of all, we acknowledge that students are disadvantaged and not hopeless, and it's a structure that has harmed their ability to succeed and not inherent issues with intelligence. This explains to you why teachers within these schools and also outside of these disadvantaged schools are going to now help these disadvantaged students. But third of all, the reason why teachers just don't go to these disadvantaged schools in the comparative is because there is no motivation to do so. Because if there is a baseline increase, the lower decile schools are still going to be paid less. No teachers are going to go. At the end of this, I've explained why teachers at disadvantaged schools are just going to be much better on our side of the house, because you increase teachers to actually go there. They have the capacity to improve learning outcomes, because first of all, I've explained why it is not the student's fault, but the problems with resources. Second of all, I explained the massive importance of education for these students. So any improvement that we get ought to be weighed highly, even if it is marginal. At the end of the speech, I think it is clear that we are proud to work that.
Please stand by the speaker.
When you stand for fair, you stand with side Nick. When you stand for good teaching, you stand with side Nick. When you stand for the future, you stand with side Nick. Okay, I've got some things to do for you in my speech today. Inequality, incentives, ineffectiveness, and hopefully all in the time frame. Let's get into it. Okay. First of all, on inequality, because that's the split push they gave you. They tell you that teachers right now aren't going to rough schools. Why? That's simply not true. One, because government pay rates are the same in lower decile areas, and two, because teachers who are on low pay need to live in an area where housing is really cheap. So they are likely to live closer to lower decile areas, and so more likely to be proximate to these schools than schools in higher decile areas. So if they get paid the same, it's much easier and cheaper in terms of commuting costs for the teachers to teach at these schools. There is simply no reason why they wouldn't. When they're paid the same, they get to go in, and when they don't have as much competition because the school is so fancy and rich that it wants to hire a new teacher every day for a new different subject, it's actually easier to exist in a lower decile school near a cheaper housing when you're on a teacher's salary, especially when you get paid the same. So I think their initial characterization that teachers aren't going to these schools is simply wrong. But then, okay, let's imagine that these teachers are all flooding to these schools. What teachers are you going to get? You're going to get the most money-hungry teachers. You're going to get the teachers who are like, I'm uprooting my life to chase that extra dollar. You're not going to get the teachers who are actually incentivized in doing the things like the pastoral care, like teaching people conflict resolution, etc., that we tell you is really important, and especially important in lower decile areas where there's often less parental involvement in the children's lives, so they need that sort of figure who gives them a holistic education and the things on life. When they tell you that teaching kids conflict resolution has immediate bonuses in exams, I think they are simply wrong because there is not an exam that can demonstrate using conflict resolution, and there is not a system that can demonstrate using teamwork in the exam unless their exam covers literally every area somebody needs to have to be good at life. We've not invented an exam that can do that. That's extremely difficult, and likely you're still going to see pastoral care falling through the cracks. So what you're going to get is a flood of money-hungry teachers going to all these lower decile areas and just teaching people so that they can pass the test instead of giving them the important pastoral care that they need. I think the inequality point I have flipped. It is now on our side of the house. Hooray. Okay, and also I just think that the teachers who are extremely motivated by money just go to private schools rather than just like flooding to low decile areas because they'll always be able to pay more. Okay, that's the end of their inequality point. Before I move on, I'll take their point.
In better schools, it is simply easier to exist because the kids are more motivated, it's more rewarding. Why then will these good teachers actually go to these lower decile schools unless given the incentive?
It's not more rewarding because the kids are all snobby, and also, more specifically, because they're all probably already really good at things, and so you as a teacher don't get that feeling of being able to teach them and being able to reward them. Also, I think there's just a really clear and simple mechanism. It's easier to exist in a lower decile area, especially when you're on the low pay of a teacher. If it's closer to where you live, it is easier to teach there, so more teachers actually go to these lower decile areas. Intuitive. All right, now let's get on to the second idea around incentives. Now, they've just told you some straight up lies about incentives. They've told you that under our model, teachers are going to be demotivated. First of all, again, this happens on their side of the house when teachers, even if they are bad teachers, perceive that they're being robbed, perceive that even though they're doing this extra that they should be doing, they're not actually being rewarded for it. And so they just either have to teach the test or become demotivated, realize that the system will never reward them on their side of the house either. But I also just think that when you have our model of increasing the resources in terms of teaching and support that teachers get, you have teachers that are more able to actuate results, that will feel like they have the support necessary, and so they are more engaged because they are not feeling, oh, I can't teach this sort of thing, oh, the curriculum keeps changing on me. They think I am supported, and when they have the ability to teach, they will teach. Because we tell you that the reason teachers go into teaching is because they love teaching, not money, because teaching pays badly, but it's quite rewarding as a job, and so they have a revealed preference to just like teaching. We don't think that they get as demotivated. I think even the slacker teachers, when they're constantly having to be taught by these refresher courses and reminded of what they love about the job, while also getting like a 3-month break from the devastation and the burnout of the classroom, they simply come back as better, more motivated teachers that are refreshed. But I think at a baseline, people who really don't want to do any work will just sit in that lower pay grade and take the thing because they've already proved that they don't care that much about getting extra money. They don't care about money and they don't care about doing their job. They're not going to change on either side of the house. What does change then is when teachers are given a rating. I don't think teachers care how much they're paid as much as being paid, having a job, having job security. And so when you give teachers a rating, when that rating is a bad one, you tell them you could leave at any point. If you fail this year, you're out. There's always a better teacher waiting in the wings. Teachers feel the pressure to constantly perform because they want the job security that comes from being a really high-rated teacher. They don't want the school to be like, we need better exam results, you're out, this guy who's got a higher rating is in. And also they want the mobility to be able to move between schools and teach where they want. So when teachers live in fear of their job because they are apprehensive that a bad rating will result in them being brought out, that is when they are extremely motivated to game the system, even if they don't want to, because they have to keep their job, and they rationalize it. They say, well, I can still do more good teaching and gaming the system than I could if I was fired. All right? And that's when you have teachers leaving children behind. That's when you have bad education results. That's when your future begins to look grim. That is what is going on with teachers' incentives. That is why we win that point. They are gaming the system on their side of the house because they are in fear of their very livelihoods, and so they are forced to. Whereas on our side of the house, they don't care too much about a small pay bump. And Like on our side of the house, they can simply continue to do as they've been doing, now with the support, the constant refresher, and the constant reminder and break of what they love about the job and the support to bring it through. Finally, on inefficiency, this was my split point. Okay, unions will never allow this. Teachers' unions stand really, really strongly for teachers being all paid fairly. Why? Unions rely on consensus culture. They are fundamentally democratic organizations. That means that a union must do what is best for absolutely all of its members. When this is proposed, all of the members of the union will be worried that they will lose their job, that they will get a bad rating, that they will be in the bottom rating, even though the majority of them probably wouldn't be. What does this mean? It means unions who are reliant on these voters will never stand for this. This looks like a standoff between teachers' unions and the government. Yes, they have the fear to implement this policy, but will the teachers ever bow to the government when they bring in their tyranny? No. The teachers' unions have a history of standing up to the government, and they will continue, and they will garner public support. They will say, why not take this money and just give a boost to all teachers? And you know what? That's a reasonable argument. That's one that the public will support. And so you get a drawn-out battle between teachers and the government. And who's left behind? Students. Education is left behind when you fight this battle. Teachers' unions will have to be dissolved or their power curtailed before they are able to do this. Like the dock workers who were ordered by the police back to their jobs in the 1800s because it's the only way the government will be able to retain stability and implement their policy. No unions, nobody will become a teacher. Life sucks for teachers. They are vulnerable. They need the support. That's why we win.
And then the speakers of this speech, and I invite the third speaker of the opponent team to conclude their team's substantive portion.
They say that teachers are getting robbed. That is precisely the problem in the status quo. Teachers who do extra in the status quo feel like they're getting robbed because they earn the same amount as in the comparative to a person who does absolutely nothing. They earn less than someone, so they earn the same amount as someone who can just slack off and do absolutely nothing. So if they want to talk about teachers feeling like they're getting robbed, that exists more on their side of the house. And that is precisely why unions are going to want this. Because most teachers, if we buy their characterization, care about teaching, then obviously they do not want to feel like they've been robbed. Obviously they do not want to feel like people who do absolutely nothing, do absolutely shit all, are better on their side of the house. That's why unions will want them, and that responds to the split. I'm going to talk about a few issues then. The first thing I'm going to ask is, what is the problem of teachers in the status quo? They seem to claim that they need teacher colleges to engage in pastoral care, but I want to prove to you why this was never the problem for teachers in the status quo. Then I'm going to talk about why we get better teachers. Then I'm going to talk about why we get more quality. No, equality got very, very little response. We only got 2 glib responses, and if I can prove to you equality, we'll weigh that too. Sarissa will do that as well. Okay, what is the problem of teachers in the status quo then? Because note their model. They say that they want teachers to go to teaching colleges, but for what purpose? We'd say a few things here. Firstly, we'd say that these teachers probably already have good educational standards too. This is because, for example, they go through university, they probably do 6-7 years of teaching, etc., etc., etc. So they probably picked up a lot of these skills anyways. But secondarily, we'd say that a lot of teachers, they learn on the job. Eventually, over time, in primary school, for example, you learn a lot of things to do with pastoral care. You learn a lot of things about how to take care of a child. So we think that just amasses over time. It was never clear why a teaching college was necessarily needed. But what we'd argue is the problem in the status quo then is that these teachers lack money and they lack incentive. Why? Because they lack incentive because obviously it's the mechanism we explained at the start. They feel like they are getting robbed. They feel like they do not want to do the same because everyone else on their side of the house is doing the less amount of work for the same amount of pay. That is the problem. And insofar as we can fix this problem on our side of the house, that is how we win this debate. That is the path to victory here. But the final thing I want to know is even if you didn't believe all of that analysis, we just still say that teaching colleges can be roughly symmetric. Sure, we'll bite the bullet that it's got less funding on our side of the house, but at the worst case, the things that you're likely going to learn are likely learned on the job anyways. They're not learned at teaching colleges. What you should believe at the end of this clash then is that the problem in the status quo is one of incentive. It's never one of the ability for teachers to teach. That is why you all buy our side of the house. Insofar as we prove to you, we give this incentive to teachers. That is where we win this debate. Okay, cool. Now that I've dealt with that, let's talk about why teachers are going to be happy on our side of the house. We told you 3 things from Bella. 1, that you have a monetary incentive. We literally got no response from this. Please note that. 2, we told you that it's going to be a more rewarding experience because if teachers, like they claim, want to come in to try teach, then obviously on our side of the house, it's more rewarding insofar as they can pocket cash at the same time as helping their students. But finally, we'd also say that like teachers also are going to feel better because there's less bias. Oftentimes in the status quo, schools are exploited significantly. They give teachers different amount of bonuses based on the pay they have. When we have our model and you pay based on progress, based on your grades, for example, that is when there's less bias. That is when teachers feel more confident in teaching as well because they know they aren't going to be tricked or cheated by a principal. So teachers are going to be better. What were their responses then? Their first response was just that, hey, you cannot judge the quality of a good teacher. Look here, we just say that yes, we can. Reason why is because we told you from Bella that you're going to track the progress of each student. No, for the progress of each student to improve, you have to be able to take care of the pastoral things of the child. If a child is like literally failing and getting D pluses every single day, of course something is going on at home. Of course something is going on elsewhere. So if you want a teacher to track progress, then you automatically need to train those things as well. It gets subsumed into our case. You automatically need to train a lot of these teachers and help students to deal with things like pastoral care. But even if you didn't believe that, we just say that pastoral care exists primarily in primary school and things like that. For example, in the first 6 years of my life, I don't think I learned a single math equation. Everything I learned was developing good values, was developing good health. So we think that majorly happens in primary school as well. Okay, but the second thing we told you from Sarissa, third needs to do a lot of work on, is we explain why you have other ways of testing this pastoral care broadly. Like you can still have things like oral exams. You can still have things like telling your student to speak for 4 minutes, to try speak for 4 minutes, and if they do so, you get a prize. But even if you didn't believe that, we told you that like even if we have to bite the bullet and say that it is just based on your grades, we say that grades are probably extremely important for your future too. They literally determine what universities you get into. They literally determine what path of the future you take. So if we want to benefit the pastoral and the well-being of these students in the future, then you all prioritize their grades anyways. So what you should believe at the end of this then is that even if we have to bite the bullet, we're happy to bite the bullet. Grades are immensely important for the future of a child's life. You all care for the long term rather than the potential short-term harms to their well-being. But finally, they've then said that like teachers still want to teach. And I want to say here that Michael knifes his own case, right? Because he says that, teachers are so scared right now because they feel like they're forced to do all of this work on our side of the house. But they then say that teachers still want to teach anyways because they're altruistic. These two things are in contradiction. He has to choose one. That's why they're framing and assume that teachers do still want to teach. Why do we win? Because 1, it means that you're able to do like pastoral care anyways. Like note that like because you still want to teach, you probably still want to do good work. You probably still want to help the people around you and help the children around you because you do still want to teach. We're buying their characterization here as well. But finally, even if you do not believe that, please weigh the mechanisms here. On our side of the house, you have financial doubt and you have massive amounts of disappointment. Weigh that to just wanting to help your students on their side of the house. That could never happen if teachers were never ever paid. On our side of the house, when teachers are paid, when they're able to cover their bills, when they're able to have a lack of financial security on their side of the house, that is when teachers do not want to teach. Comparatively, when they cover most of these proximate struggles, that is when they want to teach on our side of the house because of proximity. What you should believe here then is that teachers are just simply going to get better on our side of the house. This is because they still care on their side of the house. On our side of the house, we remove the financial barriers for them. Before I move on to equality, which got very little response, I'll take a POI.
How do you create a test which tests conflict resolution? How do you create a test which tests teamwork? And how do you do all this cheaply and effectively on a national
just responded to this in a few ways. 1, we told you that teachers still want to teach well, so they're probably still going to teach good and do good stuff there. But secondly, we just say you can still have different metrics. Like you can tell them to do a speech, you can tell them to do a team scenario, and the person who solves the most scenarios win. We think there are many ways to do this and they'll adapt over time. Finally then, on equality. The reason why I've left some time for this is because we get 2 very glib responses from Michael. He tells us that, it's not true because teachers all get paid the same. And he also tells us that, he tells us that, they want to live in cheap areas. The first thing to know is that this is objectively not true. I feel like I go to a pretty privileged school, and oftentimes there's things like head of department and dean roles as well. And obviously, in good regions, they get more funding from, for example, the MOE, so they obviously get paid more. Compare that to a school in a very poor rural area, obviously they're going to be paid less because the MOE diverts less funding to them. But secondly, even if you didn't believe that, we just say it requires far more effort on our side of the house to teach a lot of these students, because oftentimes they are the least and they're the most averse from actually doing well in their classroom. They're the hardest to teach, etc. So, insofar as you believe that response, then you ought buy all of Sarissa's material. We told you that on our side of the house. Teachers can feel better staying in their regions, and they don't have to move from Dunedin to Auckland if they are able to know their people, if they can feel like they're doing, and they can stay in their regions and they don't have to leave. We also told you that teachers feel there's less bias for their bonuses because they're measured on their performances, not on how much the principal likes a teacher. So we get more quality. Teachers feel better. They're more willing to teach. For all those reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
The speaker I invite the third guiding speaker to include the substantive comments. But
The government treats teachers like rubbish. Teachers under either side will always be expected to start off on a base rate which is slightly above living wage. They will always be saddled with tens of thousands of dollars on university debt. These are very symmetrical issues, which is to say that if you ever cared about the economics of being a teacher, you would never get into teaching in the first place. That is to say, the vast majority of the teachers we are talking about in this debate have a deep emotional connection to seeing their students do well. I don't think it's reasonable for AF to keep focusing on the money. All right, three things to prove in my speech. Firstly is splitting the teachers up into two groups, bad teachers and good teachers, and then lastly is addressing vulnerable children by themselves. All right, so firstly on bad teachers. I want to start off by noting that this is likely to be an incredibly small group. So I think a lot of AF's material is just focusing on the bad teachers. And I think that they tell you that bad teachers lack motivation and they therefore put in the least possible motivation. Look, as I said earlier, I think if these teachers just cared about the money or just cared about getting an easy paycheck, it's unclear why they keep teaching. They probably just go to another easier job, which will pay more better. The second thing on bad teachers I will say is that, look, they still have an intense performance incentive, which likely symmetricizes it to some degree, right? Because you still have internal within school performance assessments whereby schools see how the teachers are performing. You still have ERO. They still have to renew their license. I think that this means that you have a severely diminished number of bad teachers. Even if you do have bad teachers, why does paying them for their performance never actually affect the effort they put in? I think there are three reasons. Firstly is because it doesn't create an immediate impact, right? Because because these teachers know that they can spend a bunch of time trying to get students interested in these subjects, but oftentimes the impact isn't immediate. Maybe you start caring, but your grades probably only improve to an extent in later years. I think that to the extent that bad teachers do exist, the core reason is burnout, and this is something which is never addressed by either side. Right? Because you walk into a classroom having to teach 30 kids calculus when they're all really struggling. You have to stay at school late marking when you really want to be with your family. These are things which are not part of a teacher's performance, and yet teachers really keep doing. And I think that what this means is that if the teachers cared about doing the bare minimum, they wouldn't be doing all the stuff. They'd just go to another job. I don't think you have a large number of bad teachers. I think we've given you a large number of incentives why these bad teachers would still be incentivized to do well. You can still be promoted within the school to something like a deputy principal. I think the teachers are perfectly incentivized. I think what this means is that you have a limited extent of those really bad teachers who just don't care like they keep talking about. I think on that then, it makes sense to move to the good teachers. I think that no, these are the vast majority of teachers. We've given you a ton of mix as to why. I think that These teachers don't care about money, they care about the non-material, emotional stuff. This is the vast majority of the teachers. I think that
QI.
no. I think that they never respond to the mix we've given you, which is that the biggest thing which impacts how these good teachers perform is their understanding of the content. It's the fact that our side is offering them comprehensive curriculum teaching to help them stay up to date. No, they say I think that what we pushed you is that these good teachers care about a bunch of non-tangible things. Things like teaching anger management skills to a group of primary school students who don't otherwise know how to. It's things like helping toilet train year ones because their parents never did it, they were too busy. It's things like staying after school to help a kid who continues to turn up but realistically has no chance of succeeding. I think that these are things which good teachers probably care about a lot on our side, and these are things which we have told you down the line can simply never be assessed in any kind of performance matrix. The only response they've given us is to say that it has some impact on grades, but I think this falls short because these kids still have the intense problems. I think the value that the teachers provide in this instance is their emotional support, and this is something that we weigh incredibly weigh quite highly. And note why this is symmetrical, why this is not symmetrical, and you can only get this effort put in on our side. Because, firstly, obviously there's an opportunity cost, right? These teachers choose to give up their own free time to do these non-tangible things. I think on the affirming side, teachers become far more caught up on the things like grades, and therefore they spend less of the time doing this stuff because they're scared of not being seen as a good teacher. They're scared of the government telling them that they don't matter. They know that the school will start to weigh grades more highly when we actually care about this really non-tangible stuff. I think that they also, and of course they fear not meeting the cut. Yeah, go ahead.
Your future is decided on your grades. Maybe young idealistic teachers don't.
No, I'll cut you off. Your future is not decided on your grades. I didn't think that was rude. I thought, anyway. I think that your future isn't decided on the grades. I think that for the vulnerable kids you keep talking about on your side, the thing which has the bigger impact on future is those non-tangible things I keep talking about, such as providing support for those non-tangible things. I do apologize if that was rude. I thought that was normal. Anyway, I think that on these good teachers, they're doing their best, I think, is the grand scheme of things. However, the issue is that I think that, look, we've also given you these pushes on unions, though, which is to say that the government puts literally no value on teachers. They treat the teachers like rubbish, and that unions have a baseline responsibility to advocate for all members. And this means that on side affirming, if they choose to implement this metric, I think what ends up happening is the unions become very fragile, they become very grumpy. I think that probably what happens is the unions become far more prone to striking. This has a really tangible impact on student performance. I think that I think that the thing with these unions is that they have immense power over the teachers, and that the teachers feel very invested in the union. So if they see their union being disempowered, they're likely to feel more demotivated on the affirming side of the house. Note that I think that the way these teachers feel in terms of doing their jobs is something that we should weigh in this debate very highly, because the teachers are paid so poorly. We tell you that they always care about these non-economic things. Now, lastly, on vulnerable children. No, I think that this is a bit of a side point. I think that you kind of inherently address it by addressing why these teachers just care about doing good things. I think that the thing with these vulnerable children is that they are most reliant on the intangible stuff because they may never have a chance of doing well academically. However, if we help them, we can give them these life skills which have a big impact on their life. I think that this obviously only occurs on our side, but I think additionally, they've said that there's otherwise no incentive for teachers to help these kids. I think that, like in an academic sense, I think that the Ministry of Education still funds these low decile schools. Additionally, the teachers still feel that individual sense of reward and catharsis. That's symmetrical. So proud to negate.
Thank the speaker for their speech, and I now invite the leader and to
Think a world where it's an altruistic teacher that goes into an industry because they want to make a change, because they really want to see students develop into overall far better human beings. Think in a world where that teacher loses their motivation because they are told by a system that values grades and those numerical outcomes, and one in which that teacher is now demotivated, doesn't want to put in the effort. That is a world we do not stand for. That is a world we do not want. 2 points in this debate, splitting these teachers down to our different categories that Bryn told you about. One, what are the impacts on our altruistic teachers? And then secondly, what are the impacts on these bad or non-altruistic teachers who maybe have this profit incentive? Firstly, and most importantly, on the impacts on our altruistic teachers. Now, firstly, why do we believe there are just inherently far more altruistic teachers? And who these kids who are in it for the kids, who want to see the kids grow like the classes that I told you about. One, well, I mean, we just give you this characterization at first as to why this is the case. We tell you that we have this revealed preference with these teachers. Both sides agree that our teachers tend to most likely be highly educated. They've gone to university, they've gone to teaching colleges, as the AF team have told us about. They've gone through all of this process of a long educational career in which they could have become a doctor, an engineer, these higher paying jobs with much better hours. They have chosen not to go down this path. They've chosen to go down the path of teaching kids. The preference here is quite clear what our teachers care about. It is teaching these kids and doing best for these kids. We believe it's very important that we view the debate through this lens. So what is the impact on these people? We give you a lot of these characterizations down the line as to why these teachers now become demotivated. We can go over them again. It's because you can't quantify these things through grades, the pastoral care that we care about quite a lot as well. You can't cope with the increased changes to the system and the disruptions that you currently get. So why don't you see pastoral care in the grades? Why do you not see this in a quantifiable way? Why is it impossible to do so? One, again, we tell you that these are inherently long-term things. We believe that if they want to stand for a system in which you assess all your anger management skills, if you want to entirely create almost a new way of teaching in New Zealand or around the world, in which you want to have all these different tests, and that's difficult for them to do. But we also believe that just the incentive exists still, but you still want to focus on the majority of kids in your class to get them up. The incentive still exists for you to care about all the kids in your class and get them all uplifted on a grade. We believe it takes time to develop a kid, to develop skills. You must have one-on-one time. You must pull them aside in class. We believe, as we've told you down the line, the incentive still exists on these teachers due to these things. Due to this pay incentive to now not worry about those kids and to just worry about kids more broadly and just teach for tests. Now, why is it at this point that the incentive on teachers changes from caring about kids to having this motivation about how this motivation about pay performance now changes? We believe you are now told and you're implied that you're a bad teacher, that what you're doing is not sufficient, that your way of teaching these kids is not good enough. You're going to get the motive and you're just not going to be likely to get another job where you can continue to teach these kids. So at this point, as a teacher, your calculus changes. You're no longer motivated to do the right thing for these kids. You're motivated to teach for a test. We believe the impact of this is that they don't go to disadvantaged schools to help these kids because they take less time to help these kids. They don't do these things. We believe that even if you even if you buy all the material about you can see this pastoral things, it's easier to focus again on these other kids, but also they cannot do it. We tell you at first why they cannot do it. We tell you then that we have teaching colleges which can do this. We believe the point when you have significant incentives for you to be motivated by a paid performance, but also likely have really efficient and effective teaching colleges. We believe that this motivation, we believe that the vast majority of teachers are now demotivated. Students are far worse off under their side of the house. Very quickly on these bad and non-altruistic teachers, we've Mark give you a bunch of reasons why you're unlikely to go to a poor school or why you're motivated by these things. But we believe, once again, at its core, the core issues do not change as to why, the core issues do not change as to why you don't have an incentive to work. Because at this point, if you are motivated so much by money, you would just go to another industry. We believe the core issues that you care about don't exist. That is why I'm proud to negate.
I think that's good. I think we can invite the leader of the agenda scheme to this debate.
To win this debate, negating needed to prove to us why increasing the baseline pay for every single teacher in the nation was actually going to improve learning outcomes for students. This was a huge logical leap that they never explained sufficiently. I think it is clear that we win today's debate. The first thing that negating tried to do then was just tell us that all teachers can now go through teaching colleges and also get paid more every single year. Firstly, I think they abuse their modelling power because the amount of money required to give bonuses to some teachers is obviously going to be less than raising the salary for every single teacher in the nation and then putting them through teaching colleges as well. And insofar as this is true, you ought to believe that the amount of money put towards colleges is more minimal because you can't fake a pay increase. So the quality of teacher training is terrible, and negating cannot claim all the benefits they try to unlock, such as pastoral care, to such a high extent. But secondly, even if you believe that teacher training is going to happen and is going to be high quality, we explained why there are already lots of similar things in the status quo, like university courses, like teaching like community society groups that help teachers improve already. And at the end of this debate, I think the quality of teachers is largely symmetrical in how they feel, so you ought to weigh this debate on some other metrics. Next then, the only positive push that we got from negating in this entire debate was what they tried to claim on pastoral care. But note that this was never exclusive, and we achieved this far better, and we win on their own metric. But the biggest mitigation to their own point on pastoral care was given by themselves, because they told you that teachers want to teach anyways, and this means that their pathway to victory on pastoral care was never mutually exclusive. We flipped their push very, very clearly when we explained how teachers now care more about pastoral care on affirmative, because it is directly tied to learning outcomes, which teachers must achieve to now get money. They care about students' grades slipping due to circumstances at home because it affects the amount of money they have in their own bank account. The next thing that we hear from negating then was that pastoral care decreases because teachers become money hungry. Negating cannot have their cake and eat it too in this debate. They need to choose whether teachers are going to be good or if they are going to be evil. They try to claim both, and because they try to do this, you cannot weigh either of their arguments incredibly highly because they never made the distinction between which way they wanted to characterize teachers. But let's take them at their best and weigh this debate on both grounds, right? First of all, we told you that teachers are never going to become money hungry because they still care about students, and gaming the system simply doesn't work. Because students have to still go through assessments, teachers are not going to be able to simply trick their students and not actually help them. Second of all, even if teachers are going to be money hungry, in our very, very worst case, the upstream to teachers actually getting this money that they care so much about is actually bringing the learning outcomes to the students. This means that even if teachers become evil and only care about money, students are still going to get educational benefits out of this, so we'll be able to win on this. And at this point, I think what you should believe is that the biggest issue in this debate is about students and the outcomes of learning. Look, we told you that teachers broadly care about students, and we gave you material down the line about why students in disadvantaged areas are benefited specifically due to our policy, because teachers are now able to actually go to these neighborhoods because they have an extra incentive of being able to help these students improve. Now, this was a unique mechanism on our side because you have proportional scaling, so that students, even with a marginal improvement in decile 1 or lower decile schools, even a marginal improvement in these students' performance means a lot more in terms of a bonus. It also means that because these students have been historically disadvantaged and you were able to help them, note movies like The Bad Teacher, you were able to get things like bonuses. Obviously, this is very good. But we rate this on a few metrics. First, these are the most vulnerable students. We are able to bring them out of cycles of poverty. You ought to weigh this material very highly. But next, on scale, there are hundreds and thousands of students in these vulnerable regions who never get teachers who care. Because these teachers are already paid a baseline amount, they already have the money in their pockets, they view these students as people they have given up on. There's no incentive to ever help them anyway. The end of our reply, what you should believe, is that we are able to win on negating's push of pastoral care, and we are also able to help students in the most disadvantaged areas. We help teachers, we help students. I've never been prouder to affirm.
Wonderful. I think that's good for your speech, and I thank both Amy for their contributions today. And now I invite the team to do crop point. Please stop. Yeah.
Really, I apologize.
Where's the camera? Is it? There's two. Oh, yeah, it's that one.
I really like this. Oh, no, it's not.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
Oh,